Woodruff, everybody. How you doing? Is anybody feeling that groove a little bit? Kind of, no? You guys feeling good after all that turkey you ate and all the ham and all the stuffing? Everybody still stuffed? Are you feeling good? Okay, well, today's going to be that kind of day. All right, it's going to be fun. Hey, welcome to church today. If you're new, you're hanging out for the first time, somebody invited you to church today, you're in town visiting for the holidays, whatever that might be. We're just thankful that you chose to hang out with us. Thank you so much for being with us today. We're thrilled and honored that you chose to be a part of our community of faith, and we honestly believe that there's no better way to begin your Sunday than right here with us. And if you don't know a lot about our church, just know we're people like you. We don't have it all together. We don't always get it right, but we are intentional about keeping our focus on Jesus. That we think that Jesus makes all the difference, that Jesus is the one that can change our life. He can turn our lives around. And so we're just thrilled that you chose to be on this journey with us. And we think it doesn't matter if you're an extra religious person or you're not religious at all, or you're just trying to figure out what this whole faith thing means. We just want you to know that we think that you belong here. I want to say hello to those tuning in online as well, wherever you are today, on Facebook Live or on our live feed. We love it that you're a part of our community too. And we hope to get to meet you real soon, or you come back and hang out with us as soon as you get home. But today we're going to jump right in. I've got several things I want to share with you, not just this last piece of living my blessed life, but we said we got some big announcements that we want to make today. So I want to carve out some time for that, to kind of keep you in the loop as the family of Cityline Church, so we know where we're going and what we're doing and what God is doing among us. And I trust that you'll be excited about that. But what we've been doing over the last few weeks is talking about what does it look like to live my blessed life, not just the good life, not just like an okay life, not just living my best life, but what does it look like to live the blessed life? Jesus talked a lot about living the blessed life, but when Jesus talked about it, it quickly became uncomfortable because Jesus's idea of blessing and living the blessed life is a lot different than what you and I might think of as the blessed life. In fact, when Jesus was talking about this idea of living blessed, he was talking about something that you and I feel like we already know about, that we already know how to do, that just already makes sense to us. At least we have some ideas about what it looks like. And so he's talking about this concept or idea of generosity. And I get it, generosity makes you uncomfortable sometimes. Generosity makes you feel weird because you're like, hey, that one time when you talked about generosity, or somebody talked about generosity, or the one church that you used to go to when they talked about generosity, it had some kind of connotation to it. You weren't sure how to take it, but it made you kind of feel rubbed the wrong way. We made a promise up front that we said, hey, we're not asking anything from you. We don't want anything from you. We're not setting you up for the big ask at the end of the series. Today's the end of the series. There's still no big ask at the end of the series, right? We just said, we want you to wrestle with the idea of what does it actually look like to live generously? What does it actually look like to kind of wrestle through the implications that when you understand what Jesus says about generosity and what that looks like in our life, what does that mean for us? We said early on that Jesus' words were this: it is more blessed to give than it is to receive. Paul reminds the church at Acts that this is what it means to live the blessed life, that it's more blessed to give than it is to receive. Not that receiving is bad. Receiving is really good. Like, receiving actually feels good sometimes. Like, we like to receive, but you will find more blessing when you organize or orient your life around giving rather than constantly receiving over and over again. This idea of generosity, though, doesn't come natural to us. It has to be taught. It has to be talked about. It's something that we learn as we take tangible next step towards it. The question that we're wrestling through is, what would it actually look like to live in this way, to live this blessed life? We said it's the idea of what do you do with what God has given you? The first 2 weeks, we kind of unpacked that a little bit. What does generosity look like? We talked about one of the biggest barriers to generosity kind of being this idea of worry. Now, if you didn't get a chance to catch up on any of those messages, or you missed a week or two, I want to encourage you to follow up online. But last week we said, you know what, that there's actual tangible next steps that you take towards generosity. We used the illustration of a ladder, saying we're taking tangible next steps as we move up the ladder, as we recognize where we are, but also where God is calling us to be. We move in obedience to the call of God on our life and living open-handed. With everything that we are, with all that we've been given, to which some of you say, no, the first 3 weeks, all you did was talk about money. You just talked about our money, which made us really uncomfortable. The reason why we talked about money is because Jesus talked about our money. He knew something about our money, that it starts there. The discussion begins there because our money's attached to so much. In fact, our money, our stuff, everything is attached to our heart. And really what Jesus is saying, it starts with money, but it's so much more than money. It's really a heart issue. This is actually about not just living a life of giving. This is living a life of generosity. Jesus says, what does that look like? I'm glad you asked. I want to share what that actually looks like with you. In fact, the Apostle Paul talks a lot about this idea of generosity. In fact, he wrote a letter to a guy named Timothy. Timothy was a young pastor who was leading a thriving church in Ephesus. Ephesus was a major port city. There was lots of good things going on in Ephesus. But Paul was encouraging Timothy in his leadership, helping him to grow as a leader, but also helping him to guide people towards what does it look like to follow Jesus completely? What does it look like to be obedient to Christ and living this life of generosity? This is what he tells Timothy in his letter. It's in 1 Timothy 6:17 through 19. If you're following along your notes, I hope you'll track along with us. If you have your Bible, you can track along with us there as well. It'll also be on the screens. It says this. This is a big word, right? Command. Command. Paul starts out telling Timothy, hey, Timothy, here's what I'm encouraging you to do. Here's what I'm telling you to do. No, I'm telling you to command, right? Command this. This is something that it's like, hey, tell people if you don't get anything else out of what you're talking about, this is the one thing that you really got to know. Command those who are rich in this present world. I love that part. Rich in this present world, because you know who he's talking to? He's talking to us. Those living and breathing right now, those of you in this room, to which some of you might raise your hand and say, but I'm not rich. Well, we covered that in week 1, where we understand that each and every one of us have been given much. We have extra. We have more. God has blessed us with so much. You can put yourself up against anybody else and see that you do have more than them. You just don't think you do, because you usually put yourself up against people who have more than you do. And that makes you feel like you don't have enough. Jesus says you have more than enough. So with that, command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant nor put their hope in wealth, right? Makes a lot of sense. Don't put your hope in wealth. We talked about that. Why? Because it's so uncertain. It's here today and gone tomorrow. If it all could be taken away, then it never belonged to you anyway. Right? As much as you want to own it, as much as you want to hang on to it, no. Don't put your hope in wealth, which is so uncertain. But here's this. Put your hope where? In God. And this is why you would put your hope in God. Because God richly provides us everything for our enjoyment. That's the kind of God that we follow. That's the kind of God that loves us. He wants to provide us everything we need for our enjoyment. Everything we need so that we can enjoy life. Everything that we need to live the blessed life. We don't have to be overwhelmed by what we're giving away, what we're loosening the grip of, what we're letting free, what we're living open-handed with. Why? Because God, he's a provider who provides everything for our enjoyment. Paul goes on, though, and he says, hey, really, I'm serious. Command them, okay, not to put their hope in wealth, not to put their hope in their stuff, but put their hope in God who provides for them. And then he says, command them to do this now, to do good. Everybody say do, okay? You know it's an action word, right? That means that signifies involvement. That signifies movement. He says, do good, and here's what you do when you're doing good. You be rich in good deeds. Not just rich in having extra, not just rich in having stuff, not just rich in having possessions, not just rich in trying to live your American dream. He says, no, you actually do good. You roll up your sleeves. You get involved. You choose to lean in, and you do rich. You become rich in good deeds. That means you do a lot of good deeds. It doesn't stop, right? This is how you live your life, rich in good deeds, and then be generous and willing to share. Even with the stuff that you do have, generous and willing to share, but don't just be generous and willing to share. Don't just write a check with a lot of zeros. Don't just do, just like, throw money at something. No, he says, get involved in something. Actually, do something. Be involved. And he goes on, he says, in this way, here's what will happen. You'll lay up treasure for themselves as a foundation for the coming age, so they may take hold of the life that is truly life. Paul says, here's the key understanding that you have to know, that when you live out this life of generosity in this present world, what you do in the present world, it affects like this later age. In other words, what you do presently has great impact and affects things eternally. Are we tracking with that? What you do presently affects what happens in eternity. It has eternal value, not just in the moment, not just at spare when it happens. No, it says you'll lay a foundation for the coming age so that you may take hold of life that is truly life. What would that be, to take hold of life that is actually truly life? To kind of give us the idea, Paul is saying that maybe some of us, because we're holding so tight to our stuff, are missing what true life is really like. Because we're holding so tight to all of our stuff that we're really missing out on this idea of living the blessed life. So what does that look like for us? What does this look like to actually live the blessed life? Paul is saying that it's not just about having stuff, it's about doing good, to be rich in helping others. And I love what Paul's doing. Paul is taking us beyond the generic assumptions or perceptions that generosity only has to do with your money. Paul says, no, generosity is much more than that. In fact, here's a key piece that we need to understand about this idea of generosity. God has shaped you for service, not for self. That's essentially what Paul is saying. With all that you have and all that you are and all that you do, you need to understand that God has shaped you for service and not for self. Why? Because generosity is love in action. Our choice to be generous, our choice to live a life of generosity actually speaks of the love of Jesus Christ and his generosity towards us. When we get involved in what's going on around us, that love is now given away. That love is shared. That grace is spread. That we get involved in what's going on around us and it changes the dynamic of our environment. But I want to pause real quick and point out something very clear. Okay? Because if you don't center in on this, if we don't get some foundational approach to this, we might miss the point of the message. We might miss something significant about this idea of doing good. Please hear me. When we talk about being rich in good deeds, we need to agree upon the fact that we're not made right with God. We don't have a right standing with God because of all the good things that we do. In other words, you cannot earn God's love for you. You cannot earn God's grace. God has already given it to you. There was nothing that you could do to try to get out of the mess that you were in. God chose to intervene for you. And you can't do anything to pay him back. He doesn't want anything from you. He wants something what? For you. He wants your freedom. So we don't do good things, or we don't try harder to be a better person, or we don't stop doing bad things and start doing really religious things to somehow get in God's good graces, that somehow that ensures our salvation. That's not what happens. God rescues us out of our sinful life, and he transforms our life, and he puts us into the work of service. Right? He has saved us to do good work that he prepared in advance for us to actually do. Now we get on board with what God has called us to, what God has prepared for us, and who God has created us to be. That for us, in following Jesus, we believe that generosity is a lifestyle it's an essential response to the gospel of Jesus Christ. That living a life of generosity is the essential response to us accepting what God has done for us. That generosity, we understand, needs to be demonstrated in our life, in our relationships, within our church, within our communities, within everywhere that we go. But I think there's a problem that may exist, that if we don't identify it, this could trip us up from actually fully living this idea of living a generous life. It's a term that I hear a lot, and it's usually kind of synonymous with my generation or the generation just after me. Typically, it's synonymous with those living 18 to 35. You might have heard this phrase before, too. They say it this way, that there's a generation that just seems to be entitled. Oh, now everybody showed up at church. You know what I'm saying? Everybody's like, oh, yeah, preach today, Jack. You're going to preach today. Here we go, right? It's this idea of entitled. We've all met somebody like this, right? That just seems to be entitled. The parents in the room, you're like, that's what I've been trying to say this whole time. You know what I mean? Like you get it. There's a certain sense of entitlement. Here's what I want to suggest to you up front, okay? This idea of entitlement, this idea of being entitled, This is just not set aside for those who happen to fall between 18 and 35. What I would propose to you today is each and every one of us in this room, we struggle with entitlement. We deal with entitlement issues. We think that we're entitled to certain things, and we all wrestle with this idea of living either selfish or living selfless. It's an ongoing battle of, do I live for myself or do I live for others? It's the difference between being me focused and others focused. In fact, I think there's 4 specific areas that maybe if you're struggling with the idea of am I really entitled? Yeah, I think you might find yourself in one of these. Maybe it's entitled with your time. Right? This is not in your notes. You can write this down. This is extra, just because it's the end of the series, I'm just giving you a little bump, like you got to sell on Good Friday. You know what I'm saying? I felt like we're supposed to give something away. Like, this is just good, right? Like, you feel entitled to it, right? Like, I should buy that on sale too. What do you mean? Only to the first 20. I was here in line too, right? You're entitled to that stuff, right? This idea of time. I give my time, right? But my time, here's what it is. It's my time. It's my time. And for many of us, time is also linked with what? Money. My time is money. Right? It's this commodity that I have. It's money to me. So here's what we say. Because my time is entitled to me, I'll give my time when it's most convenient for me. Not when the need is presented. Not when awareness has been had, but I'll give of my time when it becomes most convenient, when it fits in my schedule, when it all works out perfectly, when everything just looks right on my end and it's comfortable for me, then I'll give my time because I'm entitled to my time. What about this? We've talked about this one, right? Our money, like we're entitled to our money. It's my money. I earned it. Which may be true. You earned the money, but you don't own it anyway. We got over the myth of ownership, right? But here's what you think. You think that you're entitled to more money? Like the money that you have right now is not enough money. Like you would go to work and say, I deserve even more money than this, right? Like you're entitled to that. Like we have this sense of entitlement that we should be able to get what we want to get, how we want to get it. What about this? Our belongings, our stuff. We're entitled to that, right? Like it's mine. I bought it. This time, I actually saved for it, Jack. I listened to your generosity message, and I actually saved for it this time. In fact, I did Dave Ramsey, and I had all my envelopes all lined up, you know what I mean? And I paid cash, and I did this, And so because I bought it, guess what? It's mine. It's mine, right? We think that this, somehow, again, we're going back to this myth of ownership, and it's mine because it's mine. And then you know it's like, right, when somebody else buys it for you, it's not significant to you, but your parents told you growing up, you just wait until the day you got to buy this stuff yourself. Right? It takes on different meaning, right? There's an entitlement, right? Like when you buy it yourself with money that you saved or money that you feel like you've made, man, that thing that you bought takes on whole new meaning for you, and that's mine. I'm entitled to that, right? That's mine. What about this? What about our position? For some of us, it's not just our time, our money, our belongings. It's our position that we hold. And you're like, well, what if you don't hold a position? Oh, you hold a position. Some of you are a husband or a wife. That's a position. Some of you are a parent. Some of you are a child. Some of you are a boss. Some of you are a teacher. And with those positions, you think are entitled to a certain level of influence or a certain level of decision-making capabilities, right? Like, and you don't feel like you owe anybody else the entitlement of explaining why you do what you do. You as a parent, you just say, it's because I said so, right? And why do you feel it's because you said so? Because I'm entitled I'm the boss in this house, right? Like I'm entitled to certain decisions that are made. There's a certain level of entitlement that we all carry. It's not just subject to one generation or another. I think this is a part of one of our kind of human inconsistencies, part of our human brokenness that we think that we're entitled to all this stuff, that everything is ours, rather than seeing our time, our money, our belongings, even whatever position or influence we have, get this, as a gift from God, as blessings that God has given to us, entrusted to us, not entitled to us, but God's entrusted to us so that we would steward it appropriately and use it for good. Use it to glorify God. Use them to bring glory and honor to God who gave them to us. But I get it. It's hard to kind of get our minds around this. So I want us to point to what Jesus talked about. Because Jesus actually dealt with something similar. Jesus talked about something significant, and I think this is all going to kind of bring everything home to us. I think hopefully you'll kind of see where I'm going with this as we kind of sit in this story. It's a bit of a long story. It's found in John chapter 13. John, it's Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. It's this fourth gospel account in the New Testament. John is a close friend of Jesus. And so John, he begins to document Jesus' life, and he documents this meal that they're having together as kind of like the team. It's like Jesus and his crew, his 12 closest friends, they're hanging out, they're getting ready to share a meal together. Now, what's significant about this meal is there's all this stuff centered around this meal that is actually, in the next few days, is going to transpire, the next few hours even, is going to transpire into some events that change the world forever. That Jesus is getting ready to give his life. He's explained this to his disciples. They're sharing this one last meal together, and something interesting happens as they're sharing this one last meal together. Jesus is preparing to sit down with his crew. He knew that the time had come to give his life soon. He had just a little bit of time left with his closest friends. But his team, his crew, his buddies, his friends, they seem to be going through some issues right now. In fact, his buddies are dealing with a little bit of jealousy, a little bit of ego, a little bit of competition. They're arguing over who Jesus likes more, right? They're like, no, Jesus talks to me more than he talks to you, so obviously he likes me better than he likes you, right? And Jesus invited me to a meeting last night, and there was only 3 of us, so the rest of you, I don't know what that means for you, but I know that Jesus, he trusts me, he likes me, right? And they're worried about like the position that they're going to hold. They're worried about what's entitled to them. They're dealing with the same issues that you and I do. We jockey for a special position. There's arguments over which one's the greatest among them. It's not just my position, but you can have that, and Jesus might like you, but I'm better than you. I really am better than you. Out of all of you, I'm the best one. And then Jesus walks into the room. He walks into the room in the middle of all this chaos, in the middle of all this jockeying for position, in the middle of all this entitlement, and they're sitting down to get ready to have a meal together, and Jesus has this thought, John documents. This thought that Jesus has, that he says this is something that Jesus knew. John 13, verse 3. Jesus knew, and this is huge, this is important for where we're going. Jesus knew that the Father, that God, had put all things under his power. Think about that for a second. What does that mean? Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, that Jesus had all authority, that Jesus had all power, that Jesus was in control of all things. He is God in the flesh, that he can do anything he wants in this moment. He's got control of the money. He's got control of the time. He's got control of the position. He's got influence. That Jesus, he knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God. He came to be with us, Emmanuel, God with us, to walk among us, to do life among us, and that he was returning to God. That he was going to give his life on the cross, and he was going to return to be with the Father. Jesus understood that in the middle of the chaos that he was experiencing. He had the awareness of who he was in that moment and the power that belonged to him. And he looks around the room, and he looks into the eyes of the men that he did life with, the guys that he spent the last 3 years together, training, developing, discipling. He looks into the eyes of people that he loved, having all the power and all the authority. And what does Jesus do? It's an ongoing question, right, that we keep talking about. What do you do with what God has actually given you? What do you do in this moment? Having all the power and all the authority in a room filled with chaos where everybody's jockeying for position, fighting to be number one, fighting against who's greatest and who's least. It says Jesus does this. So Jesus got up from the meal. He took off his outer clothing, and he wraps a towel around his waist. You're like, Jesus, like, this is like, what do you, like, time out, Jesus. Like, why are you undressing? Like, that's weird, right? See, the way you would dress had a lot to say about who you were in the first century culture. That this outer garment that Jesus was wearing would have actually been significant of who he was as a rabbi, as a teacher, right? One that people were actually following. And Jesus in this moment, don't miss this, Jesus in this moment as he's looking around at people who were trying to fight for position, trying to fight for the right to be the greatest, and who's going to sit on the right and who's going to sit on the left. Like, let's go ask to see if my mom can pull some strings for us, and then maybe it'll all work out. Jesus sees all that's going on, having all power and all authority, and here's what he does. he takes off the thing that identifies who he is. He takes off the coat of the rabbi, and instead, he grabs the towel of a servant. Are you following this story? Jesus takes off the robe. He takes off the robe of the rabbi, and he brings on the towel of a servant, and he begins to wrap it around him. He begins to prepare to do something, at which point the disciples are freaking out. They're watching what Jesus does. Being fully aware of who he is, he grabs the towel, and then next, after that, he poured water into a basin, and he began, this is crazy to me, he began to wash the disciples' feet. One by one, Jesus, with the towel wrapped around him, will begin to wash the disciples' feet, pouring water over them, removing the dust and the grime and the dirt that had been on their feet from traveling to this meal. And he begins to wipe it down, this towel being significant of, I am not going to just be this master. I'm not just going to be this rabbi. But you need to know that the way of living a life of generosity comes through the path of servanthood. That I'm going to role model this for you. I'm going to do this right in front of you. I washed the disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him, to at which point the disciples don't know what's going on, and maybe you don't either. Because you're like, I thought they were about to eat, Jesus. Why are we washing feet suddenly? Because in this first century culture, that was customary. That tables weren't like our tables today. Tables weren't like you sat in a chair, you scooted up to the table, and no elbows on the table. No, these tables were much lower, that you kind of reclined at the table. You got close. So your feet was actually in close proximity to the table. And with your feet being dirty, just like you don't want to show up with dirty hands to your dinner table, then it was customary not to show up with dirty feet. So those that were actually hosting this dinner should have already prepared for someone to be the servant who would wash everybody's feet before dinner got started. In other words, out of the 12 guys that showed up to dinner with Jesus, one of them should have had the awareness of the need that was at hand and made preparations to begin to wash one another's feet. But the problem is, in our entitlement lifestyle, many of us do not want to take the position of serving. We don't want to take the position of servanthood because it might mean that we're somehow less, somehow that we're devalued, or somehow people are going to walk all over us, or people don't somehow deserve what is about to take place. They begin to diffuse responsibility to one another, and Jesus walks into the room, and he sees everyone with dirty feet. And Jesus gets up from the table, and he grabs the towel and the water, and he begins to wash each other's feet. And then he shows up at Simon Peter. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, Lord, are you crazy? Jesus, I don't understand what's going on. Like, you took off your rabbi coat. You got a towel. You're washing our feet. Like, there's no way. I can't believe you would take that kind of position. You're Jesus. How would you take that kind of position? You're not going to wash my feet. And Jesus said, you don't realize now what I'm doing. I get it. I understand, Peter. You don't get it right now. But later, my hope is that you are going to understand. And Peter said, no, you're not ever going to wash my feet, Jesus. Like, I can't let that happen. You're not going to wash my feet. And Jesus said, unless I wash you, you'll have no part with me. Unless you allow me to role model what it means to live generously, to serve you in this way, to where you can see who I am, that I am willing to serve in this way, that gives you no excuse to not serve in the same way, right? He says, unless you aren't willing to do it, you can have no part with me. To which Peter, our impulsive guy, who's always saying impulsive things, who's always getting excited about what's going on, he responds to Jesus. He says, well then, Lord, said Simon Peter, not just my feet, but how about my hands and my head too? Like, Jesus, I'm all in. Like, I want every part to do with you. Listen, Jesus, you're kneeling down before me, washing my feet with the same hands that took mud and spit into it and rubbed it on somebody's eyes and they were healed. You're washing my feet with the same hands that brought sight to those who were blind, with the same hands that healed those who couldn't walk, with the same hands that took the fish and the loaves and blessed it and asked God to multiply it and began to hand it out, and there was more than enough. You're the God of miracles. Jesus, I've seen you do amazing things, and now in humility, humbling yourself before us, you're going to wash our feet. And Peter says, I'm all in with that. There's something powerful to that, to which Jesus says, okay, well, calm down, Peter. Calm down. He says, those who've had a bath, they only need to wash their feet, bro. Like, the hands and the head and all that stuff, like, we're good. Like, you only need to wash their feet because their whole body is clean. Jesus, again, using an illustration, he follows up and he says, and you're clean, Peter. You're a mess, but you're clean. You know what I'm saying? Like, you don't always get it right, but you're clean. He goes, although not every one of you are. He's sitting in a room with the guys that he loves, that he's closest to, and he looks around the room and he identifies, not everybody in the room is clean. They might look like it on the outside, but there's some serious damage going on in their heart. There's some serious issues that are lying beneath the surface that haven't been taken care of yet. To which he goes on, he says, for he knew. This is what's crazy. Full awareness. Jesus is aware of who he is. He's aware of the power that he has. He chooses to take the form of a servant and begins to serve the people in the room, the same people that he looked around and he knew. He had the awareness, these people, this Judas is going to betray me. In fact, he's already sold me out. In fact, I know my time has already come to give my life. He says he knew he would betray him, and that's why he said, not everyone is clean. To which Peter must have thought, Lord, what does that actually mean? Like, I don't get it. Like, what are you saying? You know that not everybody's clean. You understand that somehow people are going to betray you? When Jesus had finished washing his feet, this is what I love. Jesus, you imagine him. He's got the towel. You know, it's dirty, it's nasty, right? But he chose to serve in this way. He chose to humble himself and love his disciples in this way. He chose to extend grace in this way. And when he had finished washing their feet, it says that he takes the towel off. He puts his robe back on, and he returned to his place. He returned to his rightful place. He turned to the place that he had every bit of entitlement to. Jesus didn't let his entitled position, his power, get in the way of extending love and grace and mercy. He didn't let his position or his power get in the way of taking on the role of a servant and choosing to serve others out of love and grace and mercy. As he serves, it still doesn't change who he is. He puts his robe back on. He returns to his place. He goes from rabbi to servant, but a servant who is this incredible teacher. And he asks, do you understand what I've done for you? To which, much like this room, everybody's silent. Everybody's quiet. Nobody wants to answer. My guess is nobody wants to get it wrong. Everybody's still blown away about what Jesus has done among them. You know why? Because every single one of those disciples walked by that water. They walked by that towel. Every single one of them walked in the room and they walked by the water, they walked by the towel, and here was their thought: somebody else will do it. Somebody else will take care of that. Somebody else has got it covered. Matter of fact, I'm not washing anybody's feet. I'm not washing Thomas's feet. All that guy does is doubt all the time, right? Like, I'm not washing Peter's feet. No, forget that. Peter's always getting us in trouble with his impulsive comments, right? Like, no, I'm not doing that stuff. Like, I'm not getting dirty. I'm not getting in the mess. And yet Jesus observes everything that happens, and he chooses to serve them. And it says, do you understand what I'm trying to point to? Do you understand what I'm trying to get you to understand? And of course, nobody answers, and so Jesus continues to talk. He says, listen, guys, listen. You call me teacher and Lord. How many times have we done that? Like, we know Jesus is Lord of my life. He's the God that I serve. Like, we say those words, right? We believe that, but he says this: look, you call me teacher and Lord, and here's what you got to know: rightly so. That's who I am. Jesus isn't denying who he is. He's not saying that he's somebody that he's not. No, he's saying, I am teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that's what I am. He goes, but now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, here's what I'm asking you to do. You also should wash one another's feet. To which they say, what? Like right now? Like what do you? And then you're like, is that the announcement you're trying to make today, Jack? Like, that's what we're doing next? Like, no. Jesus goes on, he says this. He says, I've set an example for you that you should do as I have done for you. Jesus, what did you do? I got rid of my position. I was willing to take my time. I was willing to engage in the mess. I was willing to get low. I was willing to take on the towel of a servant so that I could serve others, living generously with all that I am. And all. What do you do with all the power and the authority that God has given to you? You serve. You serve. God has empowered us. He's equipped us to serve. We've been created in his image and in his likeness. We've been empowered by the Holy Spirit to go out into all nations, teaching, preaching, baptizing in the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. It's this great commission. He says, I've set you this example that you are to serve those around you. So you do as I have done for you. Take action. You choose to do. You choose to get involved. He says, hey guys, we're not going to be about bickering and fighting and trying to jockey for position. Hey guys, we're not going to be about our money and our stuff and our possessions and all that stuff that's just, it's here today and gone tomorrow. You know what he says? Instead, we're going to be about a lifestyle of intentional and tangible generosity. We're going to live a lifestyle of intentional and tangible generosity. And he says, and just so you don't get it twisted, very truly I tell you, no servant is greater than his master. Just saying, if you call me teacher and Lord, there's no servant that is exempt from what the master does. Jesus says, I'm not gonna call you to things that I myself won't do. That's a great trait of leadership, right? And this idea of a leader saying, hey, I'm not going to just tell you to go do stuff and you got to do this and you got to do that. No, Jesus says, I'm going to call you to it. I'm going to role model it in front of you, and then I'm going to invite you to be a part of it. I'm not going to call you to things that I myself won't do, because no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. And this is what I love about this. He says, so if you can get a hold of this, if you can wrap around, get your arms around this, he says, now that you know these things, now you have this understanding, guess what? You'll be blessed if you do them. These things that I've taught you, these things that I'm teaching you, this lifestyle of generosity, this living open-handed. He said, if you can get your mind around, if you can allow me to do a transformative work in your heart, here's what will happen. You will be blessed. You'll be living my blessed life if you not just talk about it, not if you just think about it, not if you just, I don't know, no, if you actually, if you do them. If you take action, if you get involved, if you begin to move forward with tangible expressions of living a life of generosity, this heart of generosity. Remember, we said it all goes back to our heart. It starts there. It's this heart of generosity. What does that look like to have some tangible expressions of a heart of generosity? I want to leave you with just kind of 4 quick things as we kind of wrap this up that I think will be helpful to you as you begin to live your blessed life. What does it look like to make this tangible? We said that this week and last week was going to be tangible. I think the first is this. It starts with a willingness to get involved. We have to have a willingness to get involved. Not to just sit back and assess things, not to just sit back and look at things. You know what I love about this scripture? It says Jesus got up from the table. Jesus had full awareness of what was going on. He too saw the water. He too saw the towel. Jesus chose to get up. He was willing to get involved. He got up from the table. He took on the towel. He began to serve. You know what I'm learning in my life? I think there's a time to sit at the table and talk about it. There's a time to sit at the table and actually think through it. But there's also a time to get yourself up from the table and actually be about it, to actually get involved. To not just kind of hypothetically think like, if I had the time. No, you make the time. Even when it's inconvenient, even when it feels like you don't have a lot, you're intentional about living a life of generosity. Why? Because you have a genuine willingness to get involved, following the example that Jesus set himself. I believe that God is calling us to actually put legs to the love that we have for others, or at least that we say we have for others. The love that we say we have for our city, the love that we say that we have for the lost and the hurting and those who don't know Jesus, and trying to help people discover and follow Jesus. You have to put legs to that. We together as a church have to put legs to that. We can't just sit back and talk about it. Serving is a tangible expression of the love of God for a lost and broken humanity. But you got to have that willingness to actually get involved. To get involved. Not just saying one day I will. No, it's like maybe today is your day. Maybe God is trying to disrupt your normal rhythm, your regularly scheduled programming, to get you to a conclusion that it can't be about you and yourself. It needs to be about you living selfless for others as you serve him. Think about this for a second. The second one is this. I think this idea of tangible generosity, this heart of generosity, it chooses to see people through the lens of God's love and grace. Chooses to see people through the lens of God's love and grace. You don't look at people's faults. You don't look at people's screw ups. You don't look at their mess ups. You don't look at all the things that kind of like, you can point out like, see, that's why I'm not trying to help you, right? Like help you? Psh, please. You know all the things that you've done to me? You know the way that you've treated me? You know all the mean things that you've said to me? You know what I love about Jesus? Jesus looks at you and me and he sees beyond what we are right now to what we could be by his power at work in our life. What if we begin to see people through the lens of God's love and grace? Not just at their faults, not just at their issues, not just at their problems, but see past where they are right now to where they could be as God continues to do a transformative work in their life. As God continues to change who they are. How are they going to know the love of God? Scripture teaches by our love for one another. And you know what that means? Not just the people that you like the best. Not just the people who are most like you. Not just the people that you're most comfortable with. Not just your crew, your clique, your team. No, that you'll know your love for Jesus by your love for one, by the less than, for the broken, for the hurting, for the irritating, for the frustrating, for the annoying. Come on, don't act like I'm the only one that has them in my life. So you know what I'm talking about. Jesus says by your love for one another, that doesn't leave anyone out. What if we begin to see through that lens? What about this? You're ready to get low so that you can bring others up. Jesus looks over, he sees the water, he sees the basin, he sees the towel. He notices that nobody cares to take the proper preparation for the meal. Nobody wants to take on the role of a servant. But Jesus, he doesn't get mad. He doesn't get frustrated with them. He doesn't call them out. He doesn't yell at them. He doesn't try to make them feel bad. No, he says, I'm willing to get low so that I can bring you up. I know you don't understand right now. I know, Jesus, I know you don't get it right now, but I'm willing to get low. I'm willing to wash your feet. I'm willing to take time out to do this. I'm willing to interrupt the dinner party, the things that I need to say, the severity about what's going to happen as I give my life on the cross. I'm willing to do that so that I could get low, so that I can bring you up. When's the last time you kind of took the lower responsibility or the low job just because you wanted to get low so that you can help build each other up? I know that low stuff isn't real glamorous. It's not real fancy. Some of us like the sexier serving roles. You know what I mean? Like we feel like, man, we're really doing it and everybody's seeing and, I'm in front of everybody and it's like, woo, we did that, yeah. What about the behind the scenes stuff that nobody ever sees? What about the stuff that God just puts on your heart and gives you an awareness for, that you're right out there in that parking lot and you see that person that needs some help, so you're willing to get low so you can bring them up? What would that look like if we begin to live that way? What would it begin to look like if we took this position seriously? If there's significance in the towel, there's significance in serving, that we're never more like Jesus than when we actually serve, when we live out this life of generosity, living open-handed with everything that we are, which leads us to the point of, hey, you know what? I think to have a heart of generosity, to live open-handed with who we are, is that we don't mind getting messy to make a difference. We have to get to the point where we don't mind getting messy to make a difference. We don't mind getting interrupted to make a difference. We don't mind changing our plans to make a difference. Well, see, it didn't fit in my schedule this time. I only serve God between these hours. Just seems to make the most sense for me. Right? Because outside of that, it's messy, right? Outside of that, it's difficult, right? Outside of that requires some reorganization. Outside of that requires more effort on your part. God forbid that there's more effort on our part that enables us to actually get messy so that we can make a difference. Where we get messy and we're willing to roll up our sleeves. We're willing to get a little bit on us. We see that person, they don't smell too good. They look like they had better days. But I feel God impress upon my heart just to give them a hug and let them know that somebody cares. I'm willing to smell a little funky for a little bit. I can go home and change. I can go home and shower again. I don't know when the next time is they'll get a shower. What if we're willing to get messy so we can make a difference? I think that's truly what God is calling us to live a life of generosity. So the remaining question that we have to wrestle with is not just what do you do with what God has given you. The better question is, what will you do with what God has given you? If God is calling us to do and to be and to live open-handedly, then what will you do in response to what God is calling you to? What does that look like in our life? To serve God with our time, our money, our belongings, our position, our influence, not in just ways that work best for us, but in obedience to the things that God is calling us to. To the obedience in Christ, that we put him first, that we know that we've been blessed to be a blessing. And it's more than just a fancy catchphrase. And this idea of being blessed to be a blessing means that God has equipped you and empowered you to make a difference in the world around you. So what will you do with all that God has given to you? It's the question I want to leave you with. The question I want you to wrestle with. The question I want to knock around in your mind. So maybe you got to sit at the table for a minute and think about it, process it. Then I'm encouraging you to take the next step and get up and be about it. Step away from the table and get involved.